Most people cry when their family throws them away. I cooked breakfast the next morning. For 25 years, I held that house together. Every meal, every holiday, every crisis nobody else wanted to touch. My mom called it helping. My dad, well, the man she married, called it nothing at all. Then he stood up at a dinner party and said the quiet part out loud, in front of 40 guests. He thought I'd sit down and take it. He was right about the sitting, wrong about the taking. Welcome back to Calm Drama Story. Settle in, grab something warm, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The Sunday my life changed started like every other Sunday. With someone else's children eating food I cooked in a kitchen, no one thanked me for cleaning. My name is Thea Andrews, 35, single, living in the back room of a house that used to be my grandmother's, and now belonged to everyone but me. By 6 a.m. I had the cast iron skillet going, butter popping in the oil, the first batch of French toast already cooling on the rack. The television in the living room was blasting some cartoon at a volume that could strip wallpaper. Grant's 3 kids had been dropped at the front door just after 7. No knock, no text, just the sound of a car door and small feet on tile. Let me tell you something about families that run smoothly. Somewhere, someone is running themselves ragged so the rest can call it effortless. I kept a list in my head that morning. Diane needed her prescriptions picked up. Paige needed her white blazer dry cleaned by Tuesday. The water heater's pilot light was acting up again. The electric bill was due before Thursday, and nobody had mailed the check because nobody knew where the stamps were. I knew where the stamps were. Top drawer, left of the stove, behind the rubber bands. The kitchen window faced east. Every morning, the light came in like an apology, brief, golden, and gone before anyone else woke up to see it. I wore the same rubber gloves I'd been wearing for a year and a half. Yellow. 3 fingertips worn clean through. I kept meaning to replace them. I kept deciding it wasn't urgent. There were eggs to scramble, juice to pour, sticky hands to wipe, and arguments to referee between a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old over who got the blue plate. I didn't know it yet, but that brunch was the last one I'd ever make in that house. Richard Andrews was not a cruel man in the way movies show you. He was cruel in the way that a closed door is cruel. You don't notice it until you're the one standing outside. He'd married my mother when I was 10, 25 years ago. Moved into Grandma Lorraine's house with his pressed shirts and his opinions about how a lawn should look. Took the chair at the head of the dining table the first Thanksgiving and never gave it back. He owned a building supply store on Route 9. Business had been slipping for years, but Richard still spoke about himself as though he were the only load-bearing wall in the building. Everything flowed through him. Decisions, money, plans, especially plans. Here's how Richard referred to me when other people were present. Her. Not Thea, not my stepdaughter. Just, tell her to bring more napkins. Or, she can handle that. Pronouns do a lot of heavy lifting when someone wants to keep you small. In the living room there were 14 framed photographs on the wall. Richard at a fishing tournament. Grant's high school graduation. Paige blowing out birthday candles. Richard and Diane at the beach. All 4 of them at Christmas. 14 photographs. I was not in a single one. And my mother? She stood on the other side of that door. She could have opened it. She chose the carpet. Diane Andrews, née Caldwell. 57. My mother. A woman who could cry on demand the way some people sneeze, frequently, briefly, and mostly for attention. And whenever I brought up anything difficult, her voice would dip into that soft, crumbling register. You know how he is, Thea. Just keep the peace. For me. She always called me first. Before the plumber, before her friends, before her own husband. Because I always picked up. Grant had 2 children, a third on the way, and the parenting instincts of a park bench. He was Richard's son from his first marriage, 30 years old, working the counter at the supply store and operating under the firm belief that childcare was something that happened to other people. His texts to me were never questions, they were announcements. dropping the kids off at 8. No, please. No, if that works. Just a time and an assumption. Once. Once. I told him I had plans on a Saturday. He stared at me like I'd spoken Mandarin. Since when? He said. And behind him, I heard Diane murmur from the kitchen. Just help him, sweetheart. He's tired. He was tired. That's rich. Then there was Paige, 24. Richard and Diane's youngest. Recently graduated, currently finding herself, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until noon and asking me to iron things. She once handed me her graduation gown to press and went back upstairs. I was not invited to the graduation. Here's the one that stays with me. A Saturday in March. I'd been up since 5, cooking brunch, setting the table, washing the good china because Diane wanted it nice. When it was done, Paige took a photograph of the table. Golden light, tulips I'd arranged, the white plates I'd washed by hand. She posted it with the caption, "Family brunch vibes." The frame cut off at the kitchen doorway, and I was just on the other side of it, scrubbing a pan. You could almost see my elbow. Let me tell you something about kitchens. The person who cleans them is never the person who gets thanked at the table. But I stayed. Because of a promise I made to someone who couldn't hold me to it anymore. My grandmother smelled like beeswax and sage. Even at the end, even when the hospital had taken everything else, she still smelled like the garden she'd built with her own hands. Grandma Lorraine. The only person in my life who ever looked at me and saw someone worth keeping. Not for what I could do, but for who I was standing still. 5 years ago, in a room that smelled of bleach and wilting tulips, she held my hand. Her grip was weaker than I expected. Her voice wasn't. Keep the family together for your mother, Thea. She's not strong the way you are. I promised. The way you promise a dying woman you love more than reason. Completely, without fine print, without knowing what it would cost. And it cost me. 5 years of cooking, cleaning, managing, organizing, and absorbing every bit of friction so the rest of them could glide. 5 years of being the foundation nobody looked at. In my experience, the people who ask you to keep the family together are never the ones doing the keeping. They're the ones who need you to stay so they don't have to. The house, the one I lived in, the one Richard sat at the head of every night, was Grandma Lorraine's house. She'd left it to Diane when she passed. My mother inherited the deed. Richard inherited the dining table. I grew up in that house. Every room held a memory that belonged to me before it belonged to any of them. On the door frame in the kitchen, hidden now under a coat of Richard's eggshell white paint, there was a small notch. My height at 6 years old. Lorraine had measured me with a pencil and a soup can. I kept that promise for 5 years. What I didn't know was that the house I was protecting was already being sold out from under me. That Thanksgiving, I cooked for 16 people and sat at the kids' table. The main table had 2 empty chairs. I remember looking at those chairs. White cushions. Clean. Waiting for nobody. And I was wedged between a 7-year-old with cranberry sauce on his chin and a toddler who kept throwing rolls at the dog. Richard had smiled at his end of the table and said to his guests, "We're blessed. I'm this family. My family. We take care of each other." He didn't look at me when he said it. Paige's birthday, February. I ordered the cake. Lemon with raspberry. Her favorite. I hung the streamers. I picked up the candles and the paper plates and the gift bags for her friends. I bought her a bracelet she'd been eyeing for months. That evening, Paige posted a thank you to everyone who made this day so special. She tagged Diane, Richard, and Grant. She did not tag me. In March, a pipe burst in the basement. Richard called me at 11 at night. Not a plumber. Me. I drove over, got on my knees in an inch of freezing water and fixed the joint with plumber's tape and a wrench I'd bought with my own money. The repair held. Richard never paid me back for the materials. He never mentioned it again. That was my life. A series of tasks nobody asked about, nobody acknowledged, and nobody questioned, because questioning it would mean admitting someone was doing all the work. I heard Richard on the phone that night, after the pipe, after everyone had gone to bed. His study door was cracked. Something about property value and next quarter. He was talking to someone in a voice he used for business, polished, careful, the voice of a man moving pieces on a board. I should have listened harder. My mother called on a Tuesday, the day she always called when she needed something. This time, her voice had honey in it. That should have been my first warning. Thea, sweetheart. Richard wants to do something big for the anniversary. 25 years. He's thinking a dinner. Maybe 40 people. Somewhere nice. You'll help. Eat, won't you? She said, won't you? The way someone says, of course, as though the answer had been filled in before the question was asked. I said yes. I always said yes. For 2 weeks, I became the event planner nobody hired. I called the restaurant, negotiated the prix-fixe menu, arranged the seating chart for 40 guests, designed and printed the invitations on cardstock I bought at my own expense. I coordinated dietary restrictions. I reminded Diane about her dress appointment. I pressed Richard's good suit when he left it on the closet floor. Nobody asked if I wanted to give a toast. Nobody asked if I'd be sitting at the family table or off to the side. Nobody asked much of anything, really, except whether the shrimp would be served chilled or warm. People think hope is a gentle thing, and they've never watched it sharpen itself into a knife that cuts you from the inside. The night before the dinner, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I bought myself a dress. Navy blue. Simple. On sale. But it fit like it wasn't. I stood in the bathroom mirror under that ugly fluorescent light and smoothed the fabric over my hips. I thought, maybe tonight would be different. I sprayed perfume. A small bottle from the drugstore. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like gardenias, and a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. Maybe tonight would be different. It was. Just not the way I hoped. The restaurant looked beautiful. I should know. I chose every flower, every candle, every seat assignment. What I didn't choose was whether my name would be mentioned. I arrived an hour early, checked the table settings, moved a centerpiece 3 inches to the left, made sure the playlist I'd curated was loaded and running. Soft jazz, nothing too loud, nothing too sad. The kind of music that makes people feel like they're in a movie about a family that loves each other. Guests started arriving at 7. I stood near the entrance, greeting everyone, directing them to their seats, complimenting dresses and handshakes. One of Diane's friends squeezed my arm and said, "You're such a good girl, Thea." I smiled the way I'd been trained to smile, quick, warm, gone. At 7:30, Richard stood. He tapped his wine glass with a butter knife, the universal signal for everyone to stop being interesting and listen. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. 25 years with this incredible woman. He looked at Diane. She blushed on cue. And I want to thank my son Grant for being the man I always hoped he'd be. And my baby girl, Paige, for making us proud every single day. He paused. My heart paused with him. He sat down. That was it. 3 people. A wife and 2 children. Like a head count on a lifeboat. I wasn't on it. A few guests glanced around the table. Mrs. Keller, who'd lived next door for 20 years, frowned and looked at me. I pretended to fix my napkin. Under the table, my mother's hand found mine and squeezed. Not comfort, but a warning. A small, firm pressure that said, "Don't." Richard tapped his glass again. "Before dessert," he said, "I have an announcement." He was smiling. That was the second warning I ignored. Hawaii. He said it like a gift. And for a moment, one stupid, honest moment, I thought it was. Richard was beaming. "Next week," he announced, "the entire family is going to Hawaii. A second celebration. Sun, surf, the works." He spread his hands wide like a man unveiling a monument to himself. The room erupted. Applause, whistles. Grant slapped the table. Paige squealed and clutched Diane's arm. I felt something crack open in my chest. Something warm and dangerous. Hope. I leaned forward, smiled, and asked the most ordinary question in the world. "What time is the departure?" 40 people. That's how many were in the room when Richard turned to me, still smiling, and said, "You don't know because you're not part of us. You can stay behind and take care of all the kids." The jazz kept playing. A slow piano piece, something with brushes on a snare drum. I could hear every single bristle. Nobody spoke. Diane looked down at her plate. Grant glanced sideways at the window. Paige bit her bottom lip and studied her dessert fork. Mrs. Keller set down her wine glass very carefully. And I sat there in my navy dress, the first new dress in 3 years, with gardenias on my wrists and a seating chart I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting folded in my purse. I placed my napkin on the table, stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and I said in a voice so level it surprised even me, "Thank you, Richard, for finally saying out loud what this family has been practicing in silence for 25 years. I walked out. At the back table, Aunt Ruth, the one person nobody had invited but who came anyway, stood up. And she clapped. Slowly. 3 times. Alone. The night air hit me like cold water. Jasmine and gasoline. And for the first time in 25 years, I could breathe. And if you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't just mine. If you've ever been the one standing in a room full of people who forgot you were there, or chose to forget, hit that subscribe button. You're part of this now. Stay with me. I drove home in the navy dress. I sat on the bed in the navy dress. I found the letter in the navy dress. And by morning, the navy dress was the only thing I packed. My room was the back room. Used to be Grandma Lorraine's sewing room. Small, low ceiling, one window that looked out at the fence. Richard had never bothered to repaint it. The walls were still the pale sage green she'd picked 30 years ago. I could still smell her in the curtains if I pressed my face into them hard enough. My phone lit up on the dresser. 6 missed calls from Diane. 0 from Richard. 1 text from Grant. "So you're not watching the kids next week?" Not. "Are you okay?" Not. That was wrong. Just logistics. Even now, especially now, I was a service, not a sister. I stood up to hang the dress in the closet, reached for the top shelf. My hand knocked something, a manila envelope, wedged behind a box of winter scarves. It wasn't mine. I opened it. Inside, a property appraisal from Harmon and Locke Real Estate, addressed to Richard, dated 3 weeks earlier. The house, Grandma Lorraine's house, appraised at $485,000. In the margin, in Richard's square handwriting. Split 3 ways, R, G, P. 3 ways. Richard. Grant. Paige. Not Diane, whose name was on the deed. Not me, who had held the walls together with my bare hands for a quarter century. And if you've ever been the one holding the bag while everyone else boards the plane, literally or otherwise, you already know what I felt. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot. This was cold. This was the moment a lock clicks and you realize the door was never really open. 3 names. None of them mine. And the house was never his to sell. My mother called at 7:15. She always called early when she wanted to catch me before I had time to think. "Thea, honey. Last night." Richard didn't mean it the way it came out. You know him. He was excited. He'd had a few drinks. He just... You know how he gets. I let her talk. I'd spent 25 years letting her talk. Then I said, "I found the appraisal, Mom." Silence. The kind you can hear. The kind that has weight. "What appraisal?" "Harmon and Locke, the house. 485. Split 3 ways. R, G, P." "That appraisal." More silence. Then, That's complicated, honey. Richard has debts. The store isn't doing well. It's not what you think. I think he's selling Grandma Lorraine's house and cutting you out of your own inheritance. You're making this bigger than it is. You always do this." I closed my eyes. Breathed. "Mom, he's selling the house Grandma left you. The house I grew up in." And there it was. The card she always played last. The voice went soft, trembling, rehearsed. "Grandma Lorraine would be so disappointed if she saw you tearing this family apart over something like this." Let me tell you how to recognize someone who is lying to you. They bring up a dead person's wishes, because the dead can't correct them. I held the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her. Small, tinny, like a voice trapped in a jar. She was crying now. The Tuesday cry. The one that used to make me drive across town at midnight with groceries and guilt. I have to go, Mom. Thea, don't you dare hang up on... I hung up. The phone rang 4 more times. I placed it face down on the table and watched the screen pulse like a heartbeat I was no longer responsible for. She said Grandma would be disappointed. And for the first time, I thought, no. Grandma would be furious. But not at me. The text came at noon. 6 words. No punctuation. From the one person in my family who had been exiled for telling the truth. Your grandmother would want you to go. Aunt Ruth. My mother's younger sister. A nurse at a clinic 2 towns over. The woman who, 3 years ago, had looked Diane dead in the eye at Christmas dinner and said, "You're letting your daughter be a servant in her own grandmother's house." Diane didn't speak to her for 3 years after that. Told the rest of the family Ruth was jealous because she didn't have children of her own. Ruth had 2 cats, a mortgage she paid alone, and the only honest tongue in the Caldwell bloodline. I called her back. "I saw the appraisal," I said. "I know." Ruth's voice was steady. Calm the way nurses are calm, practiced, not cold. "Your sister Paige mentioned something about a real estate meeting when she was over for dinner last month. She didn't know what she was saying. I did. He's going to sell the house. He's going to try. It's your mother's name on the deed, Thea. He can't do it without her." I sat on the edge of the bed, the sage green walls pressed in. "I don't know where to go." Ruth paused. "There's a town. 4 hours south, on the coast. Your grandmother and I used to go there when we were girls. She always said if she could start over, she'd go where she could hear the ocean. She offered me $2,000. Not a gift. A loan," she said, though we both knew she'd never ask for it back. "You kept your promise, sweetheart," Ruth said. "The house is just walls. Your grandmother lived in you." A coastal town, 4 hours south. I'd never been there. But my grandmother had dreamed about it. That felt like enough. I packed the way people leave burning buildings. Only what mattered. Only what was mine. 1 suitcase. 3 pairs of jeans. 4 shirts. 1 sweater. A shoebox with photographs. Grandma Lorraine at her garden gate. Lorraine and me at the county fair when I was 9. Lorraine holding a pie she'd won a ribbon for. A Canon film camera she'd given me for my 18th birthday that I'd never used the way I wanted to. Her denim jacket. The one she wore in the garden. The one that still smelled faintly of soil and lavender. I stood in the kitchen one last time, 4:30 in the morning. The light hadn't found the window yet. Everything was shadow and outline. The counter, the stove, the dish rack with 3 clean plates drying from a dinner I hadn't been invited to eat. I wrote a note, placed it on the granite counter next to the coffee machine where someone would find it by 7. The kids need to be picked up from soccer at 4. Grant's dentist appointment is Tuesday. The pilot light on the water heater needs checking. I won't be here to do any of it. T. No explanation, no accusation. Just the list. Because that was all I'd ever been to them. The person behind the list. I put the house key down. The one I'd carried for 25 years. Ring finger, right hand, always there. It made a small sound when it touched the granite, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I walked through the front door. The porch light was off. Richard never left it on for me. Not once. So I stood in the dark for a moment, looking at the house where I'd grown up and grown invisible. Then I got in my car and drove south. 4 hours. That's how far away freedom was. I could have driven it any day in the last 25 years. I just didn't know I was allowed. The highway was empty at 5 a.m. Headlights on, windows cracked, the radio scanning for something to fill the cabin. And it landed on a country station, a woman singing about a house she left in Arkansas. I turned it off. For the first 30 miles, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Not for cars, for guilt. I was waiting for the weight to come. The crushing, suffocating weight of a broken promise, of an abandoned kitchen, of a mother's voice saying, "Grandma would be disappointed." It didn't come. There is a kind of silence that comes only when you stop answering calls that were never really for you. It sounds like wind through an open window. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Diane? Grant. Diane again. Then, for the first time, Paige. I watched each name pulse and fade. I didn't turn the phone off. I just let it buzz, like something I used to carry that had nothing to do with where I was going. I stopped for gas in a town small enough to miss if you sneezed. The cashier was a young woman with purple-streaked hair and a piercing above her eyebrow. She looked at my suitcase in the back seat, at the shoebox of photographs, at my face. Road trip? I surprised myself by smiling. Something like that. She handed me my change and a paper cup of coffee from the machine by the door. Safe travels, hun. Nobody had called me hon in 5 years who wasn't asking me to do something afterward. And then I smelled it. Salt. Not the salt of tears. The salt of something enormous and indifferent and ancient. The ocean. I was close. The town didn't have a name I recognized. That was the point. A main street with cracked sidewalks and window boxes full of geraniums. A bait and tackle shop. A used bookstore with a cat sleeping in the front display. A post office the size of a living room. And at the corner, a cafe with a hand-painted wooden sign that read, Maggie's. There was a notice in the window, written in blue marker on a piece of cardboard. Room for rent, upstairs, inquire within. I pushed the door open. A brass bell rang above my head. The smell hit me first, fresh coffee, cinnamon, warm bread, the salt air sneaking in through a propped-open back door. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 60s. Silver hair pinned up, flour dusted across her apron, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at me the way experienced people look at new arrivals. Not with curiosity, not with suspicion, but with the quiet patience of someone who's seen enough comings and goings to know the difference between a tourist and a woman running from something. "I'm here about the room," I said. She studied me for exactly 3 seconds. "It's upstairs. 1 window. Faces the water. Bathroom down the hall. Rents by the week. Price includes breakfast if you're down here before 7. No questions about where I came from. No questions about why. Ladies, you know that silence. The one where a room full of people hears something terrible and decides, collectively, to pretend it was normal. Well, this silence was different. This one was mine. And it sounded like waves. I paid 2 weeks in advance, carried my suitcase up a narrow staircase that creaked on every other step. The room was small, pine walls, low ceiling, in a bed with a quilt that smelled of cedar. I opened the window. The ocean was right there. On the sill, someone had left a small seashell. I set Grandma Lorraine's photograph beside it. 2 small things in a room, with a very big view. It felt like a start. Grant arrived at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning with 2 children and a car seat. The door was locked. The house was dark. He called Diane. Diane drove over in her bathrobe, found the note on the counter, read it once, then again. Her first call wasn't to the police. It wasn't to Ruth. It was to Paige. She left. She actually left. There was a pause on Paige's end, then, "Wait. Who's going to watch the kids?" I wish I were making that up. Within the hour, the kitchen that I had kept running for 25 years began to show its true colors. And the dish rack was full from the night before. Nobody had unloaded it. The recycling was overflowing. A sour smell rose from the garbage disposal that Grant had jammed 3 days earlier, and I had been meaning to fix. Diane opened the fridge and found one of my meal prep containers from the week before, labeled in my handwriting, "Chicken casserole, feed 6, 375 degrees for 40 minutes. She held it for a long time. Then she closed the fridge and sat down at the kitchen table and did not move for an hour. Richard came home from the store at noon. Diane showed him the note. He read it the way he read utility bills. Quickly, impatiently, already thinking about something else. She'll be back. She always comes back. He called my phone, straight to voicemail. My voice, steady and professional, the way it always was. You've reached Thea. Leave a message. Diane told Mrs. Keller over the phone that evening. I don't know what got into her. We gave her everything. She just left. Everything. That was the word she used. Richard said, she'll be back. She always comes back. He was wrong. But he wouldn't know that for another 3 weeks. They went to Hawaii. All of them. Without me. And I have never been more grateful to be excluded from anything in my life. The trip began falling apart before they left the terminal. Nobody had arranged airport transportation. That had always been my job. Grant's checked bag was overweight, and nobody had weighed it in advance because nobody thought to. Paige forgot her sunscreen, her charger, and 2 of the 3 outfits she'd laid out, because there was nobody standing by the door saying, "Do you have everything?" Hawaii. And because nothing says family unity like excluding someone over coconut shrimp. The anniversary dinner, the second one, the real celebration, happened at a resort restaurant. Richard stood up to make a toast. The table was a mess. Nobody had arranged seating. Grant's children were screaming because it was 2 hours past their bedtime and there was no one to settle them. Grant's wife sat at the end of the table with a look I recognized, the look of a woman doing everything while the man beside her did nothing. She turned to Diane and said, loud enough for the table to hear, I didn't marry into this family to be the only one keeping things together. I could have written that line for her, word for word. Diane got a migraine. Nobody had packed her medication. Richard spent the last 3 days of the trip on the resort balcony, on his phone, trying to reach me. In my experience, people don't miss you when you leave. They miss what you did for them. And if you're lucky, very lucky, one day they'll realize those are different things. Richard left a voicemail. His voice was different. Not kind. Not yet. But uncertain. He said, Thea, call me back. We need to talk about the house. And I thought, now you need me. You know, only about 3% of people who watch a video this long actually hit subscribe. If you're still here, you're one of the rare ones. And I'm grateful. Drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever been the person who held everything together while nobody noticed? I want to hear your story. The first week, I didn't know what to do with mornings. For 25 years, my mornings had belonged to other people. Now they were mine. And they stretched out wide and empty, like a beach at low tide. I came downstairs at 6 and found Maggie already behind the counter, flour on her forearms, radio playing something old and gentle. She looked at me standing in the doorway and said, either help or sit down. Both are fine. I helped. I wiped tables, stacked mugs, learned the espresso machine in an afternoon. In exchange, Maggie fed me breakfast. Eggs with herbs from the garden out back. Toast with butter she made herself. We didn't talk much. She didn't ask where I came from. I didn't offer. After the morning rush, I walked down to the dock with Grandma Lorraine's cannon around my neck. The film was expired, 7 years past its date, but it still loaded. I shot the sunrise, the way the light broke across the water in orange slabs, and a pelican sitting on a pier post like a judge on a bench. A man walked past, tall, weathered hands, sawdust on his boots. He stopped, looked at what I was shooting, then looked at me. You've got a good eye, he said. You should take that seriously. His name was Sam Reeves, 40, boat builder. He said it plainly, the way someone states a fact and moves on. I found a job by Friday. A small marine supply warehouse on the edge of town needed a logistics manager. Jim, the owner, 55, ex-Navy, more tattoos than conversation, looked at my resume for 10 seconds. You organized a household of 11 people for 20 years? 25. You can handle a warehouse. I wrote my name on the mailbox that weekend. Just the initial and the last name. T. Andrews. It was the smallest thing. It meant everything. And it took exactly 22 days for the house to start looking the way it had always felt. Neglected. I heard about it from Ruth, who heard it from Mrs. Keller, who heard it from the mail carrier. The lawn hadn't been mowed. The porch light was out. The recycling bins were overflowing on the curb 3 days past pickup because nobody remembered which day was which. The kitchen sink backed up on a Wednesday. The dishwasher flooded 2 days later. A seal I'd been hand-tightening every week for 6 months finally gave out. Nobody knew where I kept the extra gaskets. Grant's wife, Lauren was her name, though I'd rarely heard anyone use it, called Diane on a Saturday morning and delivered the line I'd been living for a decade. I didn't marry Grant to do everything myself. Nobody laughed. But the irony could have filled the room. Grant had to take his own children to a birthday party. Alone. He texted Diane afterward. How did she do this every weekend? Diane didn't respond. Meanwhile, Richard discovered that the house was, in fact, Diane's. Her name, her mother's deed, her signature required. He'd been to a real estate lawyer who told him, in polite legal language, that he could not sell a property he did not own. Diane, for the first time in their marriage, did not immediately agree to whatever Richard wanted. She didn't refuse outright. She just didn't sign. I need to think about it, she said. And that sentence, coming from a woman who had never once made Richard wait for anything, landed harder than a slap. Paige found my rubber gloves still hanging on the hook by the kitchen sink, 3 fingers worn through, yellow, faded. And she held them for a long time and said nothing. I wonder what she saw. Richard called on a Thursday. He opened with "Sweetheart." That's how I knew he wanted something. Thea, this has gone on long enough. Come home. Your mother needs you. I was standing on the dock. The wind was pushing salt air through my hair. A gull screamed somewhere above me. I let the silence hold for 5 full seconds before I answered. My mother has a husband, a son, and a daughter. She has plenty of help. He shifted. I could hear the chair creak. His study chair, the leather one Lorraine had never liked. Look, the house situation is complicated. There are things you don't understand. You might want to be here for that conversation. There it was. The threat dressed as an invitation. Richard, the house belongs to my mother, not to you. You know that. I built this family. You didn't build anything. You moved into someone else's house, sat at someone else's table, and let someone else's granddaughter run it for you. We're done. Silence on his end. Then his voice changed, colder, thinner. The voice he used when store employees made mistakes. You're throwing away your family over what? Some vacation? I watched a fishing boat cut across the bay. The wake caught the light in a line of silver. You threw me away at a dinner party. I'm just agreeing with your decision. I hung up. The ocean was still there. The wind was still there. A crab picked its way across the rocks beneath the pier. Sam was sanding the hull of a boat 30 yards away, whistling something I didn't recognize. Everything was exactly where it had been before the call. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. Except me. My mother drove 4 hours to find me. 4 hours she never once drove to my school plays, my work events, or my birthdays after I turned 12. I was wiping down the counter at Maggie's, 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, when I saw the silver sedan pull up to the curb. I knew the car before I knew the driver. Diane stepped out slowly, the way people step into rooms they're not sure they're welcome in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd done her crying in the car. Maggie glanced at me, then at the woman standing outside. Take a break, she said. Not a question. We sat on the bench outside the cafe. The ocean was gray that day. The gulls were loud. I'm sorry, Diane said. I know I was wrong. I waited. Come home, Thea. I'll talk to Richard. And it'll be different. Different how? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came. Here's what they don't teach you about walking away. The hardest part isn't the door. It's the parking lot. And it's your mother's face when she realizes she can't fix it with an apology. Mom, I said. I didn't leave because of Hawaii. I left because in 25 years you never once chose me. Not over Richard. Not over comfort. not over anything. It isn't that you didn't love me. You just always chose what was easier. And easier was never me. She cried. Quietly this time. Not the Tuesday cry. Something smaller and more honest. Maggie brought out 2 cups of tea. Set them down without a word. Went back inside. Diane left at sunset. I watched her taillights shrink down the coastal road until they were just 2 red dots. Then nothing. That was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. It only took a quarter century. That night, the ocean sounded different. Not louder. Not softer. Just present. Like it had been waiting for me to sit down and actually listen. I walked to the end of the dock with Lorraine's camera. The sunset was doing something extraordinary, gold bleeding into lavender, the horizon line soft as a thumbprint. I loaded the last of the expired film and shot what was left. Sam appeared the way he always did. No announcement, no small talk. He sat down on the dock boards beside me, legs dangling, and looked at the water. We were quiet for 5 minutes. Maybe more. "Good light today," he said. "Yeah, good light." That was the entire conversation. It was also one of the best conversations I'd had in 25 years. And I realized something, sitting on that dock. I didn't need my family to accept my leaving. I didn't need Diane to validate it, or Richard to acknowledge it, or Grant to apologize for it. I just needed me to accept it. And I had. Somewhere between the gas station and the seashell on the windowsill, I had. I called Ruth that night. She picked up on the first ring, the way she always did. "I'm not going back," I said. "I know, baby. I know." The next morning, I took the exposed film to a small photo shop 3 blocks from Maggie's. A teenager behind the counter processed it while I waited. When the prints came back, I held the first one up to the light. The ocean at dawn. The light thin as foil. The water nearly white. Something about it felt like breathing for the first time. I brought it back to Maggie's. She looked at it for a long time, holding it at arm's length the way people hold things they want to see clearly. "That's a real photograph," she said. 4 words. Nobody in my family had ever said 4 words about anything I'd made. I hung it on the wall. The pipes burst on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. Ruth called me with the news. A supply line in the basement had cracked. The one I'd patched with tape and willpower in March. This time, there was no one kneeling in the water at 11 p.m. with a wrench and no complaints. Richard called a plumber. Emergency rate? $3,200. The money he'd been saving toward whatever Richard was always saving toward. Himself mostly. But the pipes were only the beginning. The paint in the kitchen started peeling. It had been bubbling for months. Moisture behind the drywall that I'd been monitoring with a dehumidifier I bought with my own money. Without the dehumidifier running, the wall surrendered. Sheets of eggshell white paint curled back from the plaster like dead leaves. And underneath, the old paint. Pale mint green. Grandma Lorraine's color. The color she'd chosen 40 years ago when the kitchen was hers and the house was a home instead of a battleground. And there, on the doorframe, where Richard's white paint had covered it for a decade, the notch. A small pencil line. My height at 6 years old. TA, in Lorraine's careful handwriting. She'd measured me with a pencil and a soup can on a Sunday morning while muffins cooled on the counter. Ruth said Diane stood in front of that notch for a very long time. Grant refused to help pay for the plumbing. "That's Dad's house," he said. Richard snapped back. "It's your mother's house. On paper, it always has been." First time those words had been spoken out loud at that kitchen table. The house wasn't falling apart. It was just finally showing what it had been all along, held together by one person who was tired of holding. No one in my family ever asked me what I loved. They only asked me what I could do for them. So I never learned the difference. 2 months in the coastal town. I had a routine now. The kind of routine that belonged to me instead of belonging to somebody else's schedule. Up at 5:30, down to Maggie's to open the shop. Coffee, eggs, the brass bell above the door. Then the dock with Lorraine's camera before my shift at the warehouse. I shot everything. The fishing boats in the fog. The way barnacles climbed pier posts in spirals. An old man who sold bait from a cooler every morning and never once asked my name, but always nodded like he knew it. Sam introduced me to Linda, who ran a gallery the size of a dentist's waiting room on the second block. She framed local art, sold postcards to tourists, and had opinions about light that she delivered like verdicts. She looked through my prints, the ocean ones, the dock ones, one of Maggie's front door at golden hour, and was quiet for 30 seconds. You've never shown anyone this work before. No. That's obvious. It's completely unself-conscious. That's what makes it good. She tapped 3 of the prints. I want these. For the group show next month. 5 pieces. I called Ruth that evening. She cried. I cried. And it was the first time I'd cried from something that wasn't grief or exhaustion. Maggie offered me a wall in the cafe, the one behind the register, next to the chalkboard menu. Free advertising for both of us, she said, hanging the first print with a picture nail she pulled from her apron pocket. 5 photographs. On a gallery wall. With my name underneath. Not T. Andrews, kitchen manager. Just Thea Andrews. Just me. Richard walked into the lawyer's office expecting a signature. He walked out with a problem. Ruth kept me informed. Not out of gossip, but out of loyalty. The kind of loyalty that doesn't ask for credit and doesn't keep score. Here's what happened. Richard had contacted a real estate agent, scheduled a listing appointment, talked numbers, staging, open house dates, had it all mapped out in his head. The house. Won the sale, the clean 3-way split with himself, Grant, and Paige. Then the attorney asked whose name was on the deed. Diane's. Just Diane's. Lorraine Caldwell had left the house to her older daughter upon death. No trust, no conditions. Just a deed, with one name on it, filed at the county recorder's office in 2021. Richard couldn't sell a house he didn't own, couldn't list it, couldn't sign a single document. He needed Diane's signature on every page. And Diane, for the first time in 25 years, had said, I need to think about it. There is a kind of no that only comes from a woman who has spent decades saying yes. It is very quiet. And it is the loudest sound in the room. Richard didn't yell. He went still. The dangerous kind of still. The kind that fills a room with pressure. Then he said slowly, "This is my retirement, Diane. I built this family." And Diane, standing at the kitchen sink where I'd stood 10,000 times before her, said, "You built it on my mother's house." Grant stood in the doorway. He looked from his father to his stepmother and back. For the first time, the math was visible. If the house didn't sell, the store would close. If the store closed, Grant didn't have a job. The cracks in the family weren't new. They'd just run out of someone to plaster over them. Paige called on a Wednesday. She didn't start with, "When are you coming home?" She started with, "I found your gloves." "By the sink," she said. "The yellow ones. I didn't know they were that worn out." I stood by the window of my small room, looking at the ocean. The late afternoon light was doing something soft and gold to the water. "They've been like that for a while," I said. "I never noticed." "No. You didn't." Silence. Not the hostile kind, the kind that happens when someone is hearing themselves for the first time. "Thea, I'm sorry. I don't even know what I'm sorry for exactly, and that's the worst part. I can't point to one thing because it was everything. The laundry, the meals, the way I never once asked if you wanted to come to my graduation. I didn't see it." "You never had to," I said. That was the problem. More silence. The ocean filled it. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was the first time anyone in my family had asked me that question since the night of the anniversary dinner. Paige was the first. Not Diane, not Richard, not Grant, the youngest. The one I'd expected the least from. "I'm okay," I said. And I meant it. "I'm glad." She paused. I should have said that sooner. A lot sooner. She didn't ask me to come back. She didn't make promises. She just said goodbye and hung up. And I stood at the window for another 10 minutes watching the light change. Maybe Paige would grow up. Maybe she wouldn't. but for the first time, I understood. That wasn't my job anymore. The gallery was small, 20 feet by 15. The ceilings were low, and for the first time in my life, I stood in a room where people looked at something I'd done, not something I'd done for them, and said it mattered. Linda had hung my 5 prints along the east wall, each one mounted on matte whiteboard. The ocean at dawn, the dock at golden hour, a pelican mid-dive, Maggie's front door with the morning light behind it, and the last one, the pier at dusk. In a single boat resting in the shallows, the water so still it held 2 skies. About 30 people came, regulars from Maggie's, a few tourists, Jim from the warehouse with his wife, Sam in a clean shirt. The first time I'd seen him without sawdust on his boots. A woman I didn't know stood in front of the dawn print for 3 full minutes. She turned to me with wet eyes and said, "This feels like breathing for the first time." I almost lost it right there. Sam bought the pier print. "For the workshop," he said, "so I don't forget what the ocean looks like from this side." Maggie stood in the corner drinking tea from a mug that said, "World's okayest grandma." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some of you are nodding right now. You know the call, the one that comes 3 weeks after they told you that you didn't matter. But this wasn't a call. This was a room full of people looking at something I made and saying it was good. That is a different kind of phone ringing. Then Ruth walked in. 4 hours of driving. She was holding a small velvet box. "Pearl earrings," she said. "Your grandmother's. She wanted you to have them. Your mother never would have given them." I put them on. They were warm, the way old things sometimes are. They came on a Saturday. Father and son, looking for the daughter they'd discarded. Funny how that works. I was behind the counter at Maggie's when the bell rang. Richard stepped in first, pressed shirt, cologne, jaw set the way it always was when he wanted to appear reasonable. Grant followed, hands in his pockets, looking around the cafe like a man who'd just realized he was standing in someone else's territory. Maggie didn't look up from the register, but she didn't leave, either. She stayed exactly where she was, polishing a glass, steady, unhurried, and her presence filled the room the way a locked door fills a doorway. "Thea." Richard pulled out a chair. "Let's talk about this like adults. Your mother won't sign without your blessing. The house needs to be sold. The house is Mom's, not mine to bless or block. You could talk to her. She listens to you." I let that sentence sit in the air between us. 25 years of never wanting my voice in any room, and now he needed it in the one room that mattered. "You told 40 people I wasn't part of the family," I said. "You don't get to ask me to hold it together anymore." Richard stared at me. Not with anger, with something closer to confusion. The expression of a man whose tools have stopped working and he can't figure out why. Grant, from behind his father, said quietly, "I should have said something. At the dinner. I should have stood up." I looked at him. "Yes. You should have." People think power is about being the loudest person in the room. They've never met a woman who simply stopped holding the ceiling up. They left without what they came for. Richard walked to the car without looking back. Grant paused at the door, glanced at my photograph hanging on the wall behind the register, said nothing. But he looked at it a long time. My mother called me for the last time on a Friday evening. For the first time in my life, she didn't start with a favor. "I'm not selling the house." I sat on the edge of my bed, through the open window, and the ocean was pewter under a cloudy sky. A boat horn sounded somewhere out past the breakwater. "It's Mom's house," she said. Her voice was different. Not trembling. Not honeyed. Just flat. Decided. I told Richard this morning. I waited. I had learned to wait. "I know this doesn't make up for anything. I know that. I just wanted you to hear it from me." "Thank you, Mom. I know you're not coming back." "No." A silence. The kind that holds 25 years of things unsaid and knows it can't say them all in one phone call. "Thea? Yeah? I heard you. That day, on the bench. I heard what you said. About choosing. About easier." She paused. You were right. I always picked easier. And I'm going to have to live with that. I know, Mom. Okay. Another pause. That's all I wanted to say. Okay. The line went quiet. Not dead, just resting. Two women on either end of 4 hours of highway, holding a phone and holding their breath and holding what was left of something that used to be simple. Goodbye, Thea. Goodbye, Mom. She said, I heard you. 2 words I'd waited 25 years to hear. They arrived late. They arrived incomplete. But they arrived. Richard, when he found out, didn't shout. He walked out of the house and drove to his store and sat in the back office with the lights off. Ruth told me later that he moved into an apartment by the end of the month. That was his story now. Not mine. 6 months. That's how long it took for the mornings to stop feeling borrowed and start feeling like mine. I lived above Maggie's. Worked the warehouse by day. Shot film in the early mornings and the late afternoons. And when the light did things to the water that no one had asked it to. Sold a few prints to tourists. Not enough to retire on. Enough to buy better film. Ruth came down once a month. We'd sit on the bench by the pier with paper cups of tea and talk about Lorraine, her garden, her pies, the way she said good grief when something delighted her, which was often. I didn't speak to Richard. That door was closed and I didn't have the key and I didn't want one. With Diane, sometimes. Short texts. A photograph of the garden I sent her in October. She sent back a single word. Beautiful. That was enough. Paige surprised me. She started texting, not to ask for things, but just to share. A picture of a sunset from the back porch. A recipe she'd tried. A question. Is it hard to learn film photography? I answered. She asked another. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a conversation. Maybe the first real one we'd had. Grant. Silence. I didn't push it. Some distances take longer to close than others. Some never do. One morning, Maggie set a brass key on the counter next to my coffee. I'm 68, she said. I need someone to open up mornings. It's a job, not a favor. I'm paying you. I took it. It was the first key I'd held since the one I left on the granite counter back home. The one that had felt like a period at the end of a sentence. This one felt like a beginning. The letter was 5 years late, but it arrived exactly on time. Ruth brought it on her November visit. She sat across from me at the corner table in Maggie's, after closing, and placed a yellowed envelope on the table between us. It had been folded in half, then folded again. And the paper was soft with age. I found it, Ruth said, in a shoebox under Diane's bed. I was helping her rearrange the bedroom. Richard's things are gone now. She wanted the space back. It was at the bottom, under receipts and old birthday cards. I looked at the handwriting on the front. Shaky. Slanting left, the way Lorraine's hand always did when she was tired. It said, "For Thea. When she's ready." I opened it at the table. Ruth reached across and held my wrist. Not to stop me. Just to be there. "Thea, my girl. I need to tell you something I should have said that day at the hospital. Don't keep the family together at your own expense. I was wrong to ask that of you. I was scared. Scared you'd be alone. But you won't be. You'll find your people. I know it because you're the kind of woman people find. Live for you. Not for your mother. Not for that house. Not for anyone. That house is just wood and plaster. You are the thing I built that matters. I love you more than every garden I ever planted. And honey, I planted a lot of gardens. Lorraine." I folded the letter along its old creases, placed it on the windowsill next to her photograph and the seashell. 3 small things in a room with a big view. I went downstairs, put on my apron, and opened the shop. The morning was waiting, and for the first time, the promise didn't hurt. It just let go. I called my mother one last time, not to fight, not to forgive, just to be clear. "Mom, I love you. I want you to hear that first." "I hear you." "Good. Here's the rest." I sat on the edge of the dock, my feet bare, the water cold and green below me. I will not come back to that house while Richard calls me her. I will not watch Grant's children unless he asks me and says please. I will not cook for holidays unless I choose to. And if I choose to, it will be because I want to, not because no one else will. I expected tears. I expected the soft crumble. I expected, "You're being unreasonable," or "After everything we've done," or the old favorite, "Grandma Lorraine would be heartbroken." Diane said, "Okay." One word. No argument, no deflection, no performance, just acceptance. Clumsy, imperfect, 5 months late acceptance. "Okay," I said, "if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. You are allowed to leave a room that was never built for you, and you are allowed to build your own." That afternoon, I hung a new print on the wall of my room. And the bay at sunset, amber light, a single boat, the water so calm it held the sky like a mirror. I put on Lorraine's pearl earrings, opened the window. The ocean was still there, the way it always was. Indifferent, enormous, and completely unconcerned with who I used to be. The ocean doesn't care who you used to be. That's why I stayed. They didn't lose me at the anniversary dinner. They lost me every Tuesday. I scrubbed their floors and no one said my name. I just didn't know it until someone finally said it out loud. I don't know if Richard will ever understand. Last I heard, he's renting an apartment near the old store, which he sold at a loss to a couple from out of state who plan to turn it into a yoga studio. I almost smiled when Ruth told me that. I don't know if Grant will learn to say please. His wife left him for 3 weeks in August before coming back. With conditions. He's figuring it out, slowly, the way people do when the safety net disappears and the ground turns out to be closer than they thought. I don't know if Diane and I will ever sit at the same table again, but she kept the house. She peeled back the rest of Richard's white paint in the kitchen and let the mint green show through. She found 3 more of Lorraine's notches on the doorframe. Heights I didn't even remember being. She sent me a photograph of them. No caption. Just the marks. I saved it. Paige visited last month. Drove down by herself. Stayed 2 nights in the room above Maggie's. We walked the beach at dawn and she didn't say much, but she carried my camera bag without being asked. Small thing. First time. I spent 35 years being the woman who never left. The woman who cooked, cleaned, apologized, and stayed. I loved that family the way you love a house with a cracked foundation. Carefully. And always knowing which rooms to avoid. Some people leave burning buildings. I left a house that was never on fire. It was just cold. And I found somewhere warm. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. If this story found you at the right time, leave a comment. I read every single one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And come back tomorrow. I'll leave the porch light on.